So, Kader, welcome to CTO Confessions. It's great to have you on board, sir.
Thanks, TC. It's a pleasure to be on board as well.
So, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What are you doing? Who do you work for?
So it's a privilege, first of all, to engage in this dialogue about the future of technology leadership, right? In my capacity as the global head of data technology and delivery at Gallagher, I have the privilege to lead platforms that operates across more than 150 different countries, spanning insurance, risk management, and consulting. The sheer scale of this ecosystem provides a front row seat to profound changes that redefining our field at this time. The conversation also resonates deeply with my own writing in my book, Chaos by Design. I argued that organization cannot escape disruption, but they can design for it. Chaos is not an enemy, but unmanaged chaos is, though, for sure. So if leaders approach complexity intentionally and they can transform the turbulence into momentum, that philosophy underpins much of what I'll share today about evolution of data, the rise of Gen AI, and the cultural shift shaping our workforce.
Fantastic. And just before we jump into that, I just want to give a completely uninteresting fact to most people, but my brother-in-law is a Gallagher, so he's got the same surname, and that kind of piqued my interest there. So
Yay.
obviously a very successful family that kind of moved around, and a successful name there. So yeah, you've written a book. I mean, that's fantastic. First of all, I take my hat off to anybody that's written a book. I've always wanted to write a book. I always start one, but never finish it. So tell the audience more about your book, Chaos by Design. I love what you say here. You know, how you can use that chaos for momentum. So what's the kind of key takeaways from the book that might inspire people to read it?
So the key is anytime that we are going through transformation, it creates a lot of gray areas, right? And a lot of leadership is all about how do you actually manage those gray areas and give a level of direction to your team, right? So that's how I actually came back with the name with a couple of my co-authors were like, hey, it's chaos, but if you actually focus on it intentionally, you can actually go from chaos to more of a creator structured environment where you can actually lead your team through. Because see, anything, even our life, we all know what like a level of North Star that we want to go. And then that can be a short-term North Star, a long-term North Star, but it's never a straight line, right? You have to make course corrections as you go through. So the idea behind the book was how do you actually establish a level of North Star and then kind of make course corrections as you learn through and then drive your team and yourself to a level of success.
Yes, I love it. Chaos, chaos and chaos theory and the whole kind of maths around that as well. I've always been fascinated by it. And you're right, absolutely right, Kader. It's such an integral part of the world, you know, nature, our lives, our interactions, and what have you. And it kind of speaks to the agile kind of like mindset of embracing it rather than embracing failure or embracing chaos, as opposed to trying to push it away and trying to overmanage. You know, go with the flow of it. It's actually quite a deep approach to the reality of what we live in.
Absolutely, right? You hit it right, TC, right? It's all about that skills and mindset, right? Because to thrive in this kind of new environment requires both technical, I would say, fluency and adaptive mindsets to go through. Because the biggest thing is all about learning agility, right? Half life of technical skills is shrinking because previously we used to have like what I would say tools used to evolve every 18 months. And then you had built something around and that base, from a accounting perspective lasted for 3 to 5 years. And then you had another 18-month cycle of technology improvement that was coming in. But the way things are going on fast, that 18-month cycle is shortening and shortening so fast. So how do you get yourself adapted? So that is through mindset, right? The other part that I also look at it, right? It's cultural dexterity, right? Like, if you're leading a hybrid team, and like in my situation, I've been kind of like privileged enough to have a team in the US, have a team in UK, India, Sri Lanka, Colombia. Success is not defined by geography, right? It's actually defined by empathy and inclusivity. Because now you have so many different mindsets that are actually thinking and looking at the problem in so many different ways. and collectively be able to kind of solve a problem much more effectively. The third thing, as you kind of talked about mindset, comes to me as like AI as a co-pilot, like the most successful professionals, right? See AI as a cognitive amplifier, so that way it can automate mundane tasks, allowing human creativity still continue to flourish, right? Because there are people who actually take it to the other extreme and saying, well, it's there to eliminate jobs, it's trying to eliminate yourself. I always say, look at it, right? If you can actually create a version of yourself that can help with the level of capability, so that way you can use creativity, but you can use a level of super intelligence associated with that, that's going to make you as a person much better as well, right? That's how I kind of like, it resonates with me on the skills and the mindset side of the puzzle.
100%. I totally agree with you. I think we are going, we have these hype cycles and stuff that, I think we've gone through a frightening hype cycle. Everybody's going to get very fearful. But you're absolutely right. I think it's an augmenter of us. It's an assistant to us. Because, in fact, there was a post I did the other day around this. I wish I could remember the exact quote, but if you let if AI becomes AI in the truest sense, it's not just a prompt, a flashing cursor on a chat GPT or one of the other LLMs. It's not going to want to create music. It's not going to want to. It can be prompted to create it, but we are the prompters. We are the
100%, right? Because that's exactly, see, and you actually use the right word, TC, right? It's all about augmentation, right? People look at this as a replacement, but when you look at an augmentation, it's actually completely different. One of the paradox of Gen AI, like I look at it, its ability to deliver velocity at scale. To your point, like it's not going to think about creating music, but if I can prompt it to create music faster, that means I can actually create velocity at scale. But unchecked velocity also starts eroding trust, right? That's why the problem starts coming in. Part of what I'm kind of excited and doing is we piloted a Gen AI solution for summarizing some of the complex policy documents, and the acceleration to that was striking. Like there was hours went from hours to minutes, which was a reduction significantly. So that way, the same producer was able to do more work, or they had 20 things to do that day, but they were not able to get 20 things, so it gets getting piled up. But using this generative AI, it was able to kind of basically shrink their hours to minutes. So then they could actually spend the remaining hours to what they were supposed to be producing. So they were able to get their work done in that same day, right? So you don't have the piling that we look at. See, the thing is, I always like to use what I would say three guiding principles when we actually looking at augmentation. I love the word that you used, augmentation, by the way, TC. Every initiative must be what I would say tethered to strategic value, right? So it has to be aligned to revenue, risk, or operational efficiency. The governance must also advance in lockstep, right? As with the innovation, because what you want to look at it is not governance as a blocker, but governance as an enabler. So that way you can actually value ethics, we can value compliance, but then we are also not thinking about explainability as an afterthought, but it's kind of baked into how you actually do things. And then the third kind of, would say, guiding principle for me is safe experimentation must be institutionalized, right? There are a bunch of sandboxes that's there that sometimes, like, we see 95% of these ideas die. And I always call this thing called innovation graveyard, right? We do a lot of innovation, and then basically there's a graveyard of all the things that's sitting there, what we innovated, but never been able to use at the institutional level, right? So that's why I kind of meant by like a safe experimentation must be institutionalized. So that way we're actually going from sandboxes to much more industry enterprise grade, solutions, which is much more disciplined, in pathways that actually can take us into, implementable solutions. So what I would kind of say is like the balance, right, ensures speed serves enduring impact rather than a transient, just an excitement, right? So like, how do you go about it? It's an important part.
Yes, absolutely. I love that term that you used there, the innovation graveyard, because I've experienced it and I've seen it. And being somebody like yourself who's very passionate about this stuff, especially human creativity, when it goes to waste, you just think I mean, why do you think companies fall into this trap of allowing, these beautiful innovations, I mean, you could almost call them little babies, of innovation, and then they're just kind of left to wither away and not nurtured in any way. Why do you think companies do that?
See, that's a very interesting point, right? Like you had talked about like this whole mindset, and part of like the way mindsets get set up is the culture within the company, right? Because if you look at it, I always say it, right? Like culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's always that how it kind of works. You can have the best strategy, but the culture is not in such a way to adapt to that culture, then you're actually going to have a significant amount of friction, right? So what I always look at it as culture is an invisible architecture of transformation, right?
Love it. I'm gonna high five that. That's a beautiful way of putting it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Because that's important, right? So what I always look at, like at least, again, I'm this consulting kind of mindset guy. I always have like three guiding principles or three cultural imperatives that actually guide my work. The first one that actually guides me in helping is having a level of radical transparency, right? Like, every sprint review within technology terms, every architectural decisions that we are making must be visible across like geographics because I'm in a global organization, right? So knowledge, what I like to do is knowledge cannot be hoarded, it should be shared because the more it gets shared, the more better and refined it actually becomes, right? The second part that I always like to do is having this intentional connection, right? What I like to do is pairing an architect in London with a developer in Colombo that builds trust and it actually accelerates problem solving much more effectively as a team. So it doesn't come back to haunt each other or they have a very segregated, siloed mindset, right? And then third one that I've actually looked at from a culture to kind of help drive is celebrating micro successes, right? Recognition fuels momentum in distributed systems, right? In in the fantastic part of like if you look at it, cultures differ across, but the US, like if you look at it, US often prices speed, right? Offshore hubs maybe price precision, right? It is how you actually look at of speed versus precision, right? What are you looking for? So you have to look at cross culturally, what are the ones that you're trying to tell the organization and the value and the business value that we offer. I always like to kind of do this, and I use this example. Like I was traveling, internationally in one of our offshore delivery centers that we were doing, and this was in my previous job where we were doing consulting for higher education, colleges, and all that. And then we used to the ones who send out what I would say financial aid letters. So if you get into a college, so the college in the US says, okay, you know what, you got so much financial aid, and then we send it to the students so that way they can use that to accept it. And I was talking to one of the support person, and like she was telling, well, Kader, like I want to become a developer. I'm like, okay, tell me what is in your current job that you're not liking that you feel, oh, the development is great. Like I get to try new things. So I'm like, okay, tell me what do you do? Oh, I don't do anything. I just fix things. I'm like, okay, let's take a step back. So if you are not able to keep this up and running, that means you're not going to send these letters out, right? She said, yes. I'm like, hey, are you a parent? And she said, yes. So have you ever kids? Like, when your kid was waiting for a financial aid letter, how excited were you? How nervous were you? She's like, oh, we were nervous. My son really liked this college, but we weren't sure how much financial aid we were going to get. So till he opened the letter, like, we were just all anxious about it and as nervous at the same time as well. I said, see, that's what you're trying to do. By keeping this running, you're actually taking the nervousness and you're actually keeping that anxiety up and trying to bring it down so much. So it's unbelievable. So the impact that you're doing is much significant, right? So when you actually create a culture that actually explains and shows the value that you're creating, the experiences you're trying to bring in, that changes the whole aspect of like how you go, right?
Absolutely, that recognition. I love that, how you describe that. And that example where somebody doesn't see it I think that's the role of leaders and the culture to show you, say, look, this is the difference you're making. Absolutely beautiful. In fact, you got me inspired. I want to send out some letters now.
Exactly, right? Like, look at, let's see, that's, you know, that's one of the philosophy that even in the Chaos by Design book that we put in, to show how this kind of comes live is disruption and complexity are constant, like in a global work environment. But the task, to your point, the task of leadership is to channel them into much more what I would call structured adaptability. So you're actually turning some of these ambiguity or like they don't understand the concept into more of a resilient and a diverse kind of driving innovation or driving value or driving experiences. It actually changes the whole aspect of what you do. To your point, that's what leaders are there. Like that's what we get paid to do what we are, right? So
That's right. I think you're absolutely right. I'm just looking back at the 3 points you made around culture. I love this idea of it being the invisible architect of the space. It's kind of doing its thing without actually seeing what it's doing. I'm a big fan of culture design and culture shift, and nurturing the culture in a direction that's more life affirming, but also business affirming for the business. You mentioned one here. Sharing information, which is really important, because if the system knows about the information, it can act upon it. If it doesn't know, it can't act on it. But there was one that you mentioned here, being intentional about something. I can't remember what that one was. What was the intentional?
intentional connection, right? Like, so what we actually do is we actually wanted to pair, right, somebody from the US, let's say to the UK, or somebody from UK to India, because that actually creates more of a collaborative. So my point is, it's an extended team concept, right? Like nobody can say, well, US is not doing the work or India is not doing or UK. No, you're all part of the team. It's an extended team that you're all working together. So your job is to be able to get that connection established so you can understand from each other.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think it reminds me actually, because what we're touching on is a very kind of passionate topic of mine. So again, I mentioned systems. So I speak often about relationship systems in organizations, and that's what you're pointing to here, because it's the relationships that bind the human system. It's the connections, and you can be and I love intentionality. I think it's a human ability that we have, and not many of us get a hand on it. You can be intentional about how you go for a walk. You can be intentional about how you meet somebody. You can get intentional about how the team is going to, and that kind of then creates that guide. So I'm really curious, Kadar, where did you learn all this? What inspired you to go in this direction?
So there's a couple of things, right? Like, so for me, when I was very young, and I was helping my dad out on how, he had a small business which actually was selling coconut plants. So I used to help him out to kind of figure out, ways of how we can actually sell it, right? And then part of my thinking initially was I was almost like his guy who can actually look at the accounting part, but also I started automating some of his accounting. So he didn't know how many plants he had, how many actually came in live, just I'm going back years ago. But part of for me was my thing is like, how do I get from like, seed to the plan to get it out? How faster can we do and how efficiently we can do? So part of it, like very earlier on, it started kind of helping me to define that as well, which is what led to my thinking about like, hey, how do I automate better? So that's how this whole thing started. Wow, my life has been very interesting. So I started as what I would call, I had a master's and bachelor's in computer science. And then I started as a software engineer in my early career on. I was even at a support, like remember the girl that I talked about, I was actually, that role is what I was doing, which everybody thinks it's more of a mundane job, but it taught me how to deal with customers, right? Dealing automation, dealing with customers. So kind of understanding the customer experiences, and then the journey to kind of get there started getting me more excited about like what I want to do. And so part of, when I look at like the transformation of where I started with is where I am, even in the generative AI kind of realm of things at this point in time, I am up I'm the one who actually adapts, and my focus is how do I transform myself to understand what it is so that I can actually lead the rest of the team to that as well. So that kind of, at least that constant ways of trying to work through within your basic skills and then being able to build yours, I would say, not only not only building but also adding to your skills on a regular basis helps you to transform, because we all have a certain level of talent that we come back with, right? But then the skills are so much like, it keeps changing. As long as we have the mindset within our core talent skill to be able to manage, then you can continue to kind of like evolve. If someone had asked me right now, it's like, uh, you know would you be here where you are? No, like, I didn't even know 5 years ago, but the adaptability is something that helped me to kind of understand. Now I'm leading a global team, and we grew in the last year and a half from being 18 to about close to 200 right now. And so significant growth on the people. And then we're also bringing a level of automation, a level of intelligence, and level of, what I'd say, efficiency that we are trying to build as part of the organization right now. Because the reason for that, because that experience for me started helping me to also start preparing how roles are going to shift within my organization, right? Because part of TC, I always look at it as a technologist, we always focus on the technology, and then we look at workforce from an upskilling perspective rather than looking at how is the workforce getting transformed going forward. With generative AI, a lot of that transformation is kind of changing very dramatically, right? So you have to have a level of way how you're going to adapt your team, and then how you're going to move them. Like today, I might have like data engineers kind of doing a lot of engineering work, but that role might shift into being a quality engineering role, right? Because there might be generative AI that can actually write code on your behalf. So you are replacing role, but that doesn't mean you have to, kind of look that I'm a data engineer, I've lost my job. No, no, you can actually, with that knowledge that you have, you can join, upgrade yourself to become a more of a quality engineering person, which can actually do an end-to-end process. So even that is going to be important. So as leaders, if we have gone through the transformation ourselves, then we can start looking at how and where the workforce is going, and then you can help the teams to also be able to get through. That's, I think, is a critical component from my standpoint.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I've experienced that myself in my leadership roles. It is sometimes difficult 'cause people have a resistance. They tend to cling to their roles. They're like, I'm in this box, and you're putting me into another box.
See, that's an important thing. Like so here's the guiding principle that I've always used for me is, don't work yourself into a job, but work yourself out of a job, right? Which, because what happens is, see, sometimes the people basically are so ingrained and they become so indispensable. When an opportunity for growth comes in, you're going to get overlooked because they know, oh, you know what, I can't take Carter because without that, that function is. But if you're able to grow and groom and kind of set a level of succession planning for yourself and your team, that means another opportunity comes, like you don't even have to raise your hand. You'll be automatically considered because they say, oh, Carter has the second in command. So if I take him and put him here, he will still have some time to kind of groom this person. But that way, you're doing a shift up. You're helping your team and growing themselves, and you yourself growing into it as well.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a saying actually, Shakespearean saying. You've ever heard the saying? Because what you're effectively doing is you're making yourself into a jack of all trades. You're not just so. Do you know the original saying for that? I was shocked when I heard the actual full saying of the Shakespearean saying, which is a jack of all trades, the master of none, but better than the master of one.
Exactly. There you go. Oh, I didn't know that. Like the master of it.
No, I didn't know then until I got told.
That's lovely.
Yeah, and should have known that because Stratford, Shakespearean Town is literally up the road from where I live. And I think that's the importance. I think sometimes when we do get taken out of our role by circumstance and the system around us, the company around us, the team around us needs that, is to take that opportunity because it only enriches us, as you say, and we become new. It doesn't mean you're going to always be doing that. It just means this is your opportunity to learn that in your journey. And of many of the tech leaders that I have spoken to, the most successful ones are the ones that had the broadest experience because they understood more. They were able to navigate a bigger picture. So yeah. Great advice.
100%. Because that's the part, right? Like I'm kind of looking at it as well, is you can also bring other industry experiences and you can adapt to that into some of the things. You know, when I used to do consulting, so I did some consulting on cellular service and cellular. Even from day one, they had to be at the seconds level because that's how the billings used to work, right? At like 5 seconds, 10 seconds. But then, like healthcare was much more macro level, where they just said, "Oh, you went to a doctor, okay, it's $100." But then there's a big transformation starting to happen in healthcare where they were talking about, oh, you know what? Like now we need to get much more detail level billing. So we want to know what that $150 means. And for me, when I was hired for consulting for one of the, healthcare companies, I bought my experience from the cellular industry of how they do detail level billing into this. And we created an electronic billing system. So to your point, like that horizontal knowledge helps you to bring ideas and be able to swap some really good, solutions around as well.
Absolutely, and I'm just kind of laughing to myself because I tend to be a little bit too horizontal on the learning. I tend to go into all kinds of it. I'm just fascinated with skill sets, but you always find some learning there. This is one of the reasons why I listen to a lot of TED talks of totally different areas because it inspires you and you learn something about it. Even the building trade, you watch building stuff, and it has some. There's patterns out there in different industries which are totally applicable to where we are, which kind of comes back to your chaos your book on chaos because chaos has fractals, it has patterns within patterns, and you just have to spot the pattern and think, oh well, this seems like it applies there. It really enriches us. So yeah, it's great.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm really curious around Gallagher. Is that how you pronounce it? I know my brother-in-law telling me off. Yeah, yeah, Gallagher. So the problem that it's solving in the market. Tell us what problem it is solving, so we can give them a shout out.
Sure. So we are an insurance brokerage company, right? Like, so we do, we basically kind of insure risks for, you know, across either it's commercial properties, is it like, aircraft, all the way from aircrafts, commercial properties to human beings as well, right? So anything, any kind of risk that we have, then we actually go and underwrite the risk and help basically find the right type of insurance and insurance providers, maybe one or many based on the size of the risk to be able to support it. So when I said all the way from, commercial to, a commercial property or to people, is we also do benefits. So we do kind of manage medical, dental benefits for your employees because that's a risk that like your employees want to have, right? Like, and so we do the whole gamut of that, and we do a lot of risk management, specialty consulting. So it's a pretty wide spectrum. We are about a $13.5 billion company, third largest brokerage in the United States. And about because of the recent acquisition, we added another 11,000 employees. So we are close to north of 70,000 employees within the company. And we are growing and we are continuing to grow.
Yeah, some big numbers there, and I've met a few kind of risk people and done a few interviews with risk people, and it is a fascinating area. It's still not one that we tend to, you kind of, general people out there understand, but there is a lot of importance in it, and there's a lot of data, which is the topic that we want to kind of touch on here. So, what kind of data actually feeds into this? What's the
Oh,
what's your
there's a ton of data.
yeah, I can imagine.
So, if you look at it, right, all the way from pipeline management, which is your entry point, to, risk management data, claims data, geospatial data, name it, right? Like, there's third party risk management data, there's credit data that we actually feed in. There's so many different types of data that gets actually fed into this. And that's why part of like my job as the global head of data technology is being able to create a data lake ecosystem that we can build, and we can bring all these data in one place, which can actually drive insights for every part of the business across the board, right? All the way from what I would call corporates, corporate finance to corporate marketing to corporate HR to individual divisional based kind of like insights. So we are ones that we're actually trying to work on, where we produce our own data, we get our clients' data, we get third-party data, and so we can combine all of that to be able to create a meaningful insights for from a risk management consulting for our, customer base.
Wow. Yeah. I've got a question around I gather you love data, okay? Because you wouldn't be in that game otherwise, you know. I have to confess, I get frightened by the sheer volume of data because there's a lot of data. I think I've got a brain that wants to understand it all in one go, and of course, that's not going to happen, anytime soon. Um, so, so how do you find the relationships with data? Because we haven't just got data; we got data sets, we got different types of data, and there's some of it feed into the risk, and some of it is totally irrelevant to the risk. Maybe how do you work that out?
See, this is amazing when you say that, like, when you want to understand, you're the horizontal guy, you want to understand. I always say this is right, like, how do you eat an elephant? You start with the first bite,
Yeah, I've heard that one before. Yeah, I'm
right?
trying to eat the whole elephant.
Exactly. You start with the first bite, right? So what we actually try to do is, from our standpoint, like, you have to at least start looking at what your core that's required, right? And then you start defining your data domains on based on that. And then based on the data domains, then you apply persona on top of it of how would that be. That drives experiential data. And then you're able to say, okay, for this persona, for this data domain, what kind of insights, for example, right? Just to kind of give you, for, finance is a data domain, right? So we have a lot of finance data. There's accounts payable, accounts receivable. Here's how you capitalize things. You expense it, and here's how your P&L statement works. Now, if you look at it within finance, there's multiple personas. There's a finance person, there's an accounting person, there's a receivables person. So there's different personas, and they want to get to different set of data insights, right? They want to see the data, but they also want to see what's the trend, like what has been my trend in the last 3 months, or last, like, how am I doing against last quarter? How am I doing against last year's quarter, right? Like, so there's a level of trend for them to kind of see what they want to do based on that insights. They want to say what steps they need to take to be able to continue to. So that's what I was talking about. Like, you have to start defining your core data, and then you focus on your domain data, which is your data domains, and then you define a persona on top of it. Then you actually have a level of way to kind of, to your point, like, start eating the elephant one bite at a time. You start defining those domains and then start working your way up.
Yeah, that's a great image actually. I know the saying, but I'm applying it now to my fear of data. I think there's again this, talking about patterns and chaos. This is a pattern that sometimes we fall into, and we do need to that pattern of turning into who is this data for, the persona. I love that because we use that, in marketing quite a lot. What's the person that we're trying to make happy? What is it? What's their need? What are they asking for? So when you're building up these personas, do you go to them and say, what is it what is it you need? How can I help you? Do you have that kind of process?
Absolutely, right. Like, so we do have what we call a design thinking approach, that we actually go about, which is a much more structured way of how we go look at things. Because what we need to do is, we need to understand, and to your point as well, like, people are going to say, I need all these 50 things that I want, right? So you want to understand what there are, what their journey looks like, but then you also have to have a level of prioritization, because even if you're a large corporate company and not, it doesn't matter. None of us have unlimited budget. So we have certain constraints. So now you actually have to start prioritizing based on the return on investment plus the business value it's going to unlock. And then you start defining what is important for them. And then you start there. And then you take that and saying, okay, do I have the foundational capability to accomplish this? If not, then I would focus on the foundational capability first. So then we'll use this roadmap to start building what they need to do, whether it's data internally, data from our customers, or we even have to get third-party data. And in some cases, because of new generative AI coming in, you can also manufacture some predictive data to be able to get absorbed into that to show that view. So it's that design thinking approach has been very successful on our side to be able to have a conversation in understanding what it is, and then also help drive the prioritization so that we can start adding and unlocking business value for them.
Fantastic. Do you know what? I could go really deep into this, but on the in service of time, maybe we'll have another conversation on that. But I mean, we live in here we go. Do you think we've got too much data and we don't know the wood for the trees? Is it a case of that there is too much data?
It's always so. Right now, we have too much data. So if you look at it, statistically, 80% of the data is still unused, right? We always think about like there's a lot of gaps that we are saying. I mean, this is, I'm talking about industry, even if you look at like data industry, forget about verticals, but data industry, 80% of the data, because we started this journey in early 2000s of collecting data, and we kept saying data is king, data is queen, right? And now what I would call like generative AI is the queen, right? Like that's actually building this up from that data mindset. So we have a lot of data. Now, what we need to do is to be able to organize and structure this data so that way you can position it for the generative AI to build that intelligence around, right? Because without context, you're not going to kind of share. Like part of it, you and I had a discussion. Let's say if this thing gets edited a little bit, that means not everybody understands the full extent of the conversation. So now you're giving an edited data to something else to learn. It's going to learn from that edited data, not the entire conversation that we would have had, right? I'm now just as an example. So now you're building intelligence based on what you fed. So, but if you can give it a much more structured way of giving that intelligence, then it can start building, so that instead of looking at trying to add more data, you'll actually look at how do I structure the data. So that way the data that you're collecting is very useful, and across the board, it's actually adding and unlocking value for you.
100%. In fact, yeah, you're right. And again, speaking to the power of AI and how it augments us, is that whenever I've been using an LLM, for example, if I give it really good context, the outcome from it is just absolutely amazing. And the more context I give it, the more then it sounds like me. It sounds what I want to convey, and adds and sprinkles in some really interesting stuff that it's picked up from other stuff that it's learned from. So yeah, I think context is everything, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an important part, right? Like, because as we grow in and, the things that in the intelligence, super intelligence are kind of getting built, that's how it's going to get built, right? Like you have to kind of talk about, and that's how we talk about responsible AI. We talk about biases and how do we take the biases and all that you're going to be able to bring. I mean, there's also other pieces of hallucination that is kind of reducing over a period of time because when things get smarter, but that's why that context gets more important, like in how you actually present that information. That's why data still is very important.
Fantastic. I love it. Data, data, data. I'm
Yeah,
glad we have people like yourself that love this stuff in your teams, and you kind of do it. And I'm glad people are looking at the risk of stuff because that's a fascinating topic in itself. That's great. So as we kind of come towards the end of our time together, I'm just checking the clock. What's the things that have really helped you on your journey, Kader? In terms of books or even films or people that have inspired you in your journey.
oh, there's quite a bit. So, there's this classic 12 Angry Men that always kind of like, I don't know if you've seen that. It's called 12 Angry Men. It's a movie.
Yes, the black and white film.
Exactly. Yeah. Henry Fonda was part there. This all thing happens in a courtroom. It's not none of the fancy one, but it's a classic management, you know, uh, I would say movie that I really love because that helps you to start doing a level of stakeholder management. When the movie started, everyone were against the particular person who was the defendant. But then over a period of time, it's a matter of kind of trying to be able to do stakeholder management, understand the kind of experiences they come from and their kind of cultural mindset and their kind of like, the bedrock that actually they're built on, and then you're able to convince because that is going to be important, right? When you're actually a leader, when you want to grow into it, right? Um, the key that I always look at is one of my mentors told me earlier on in my life, right? Like, is about storytelling, right? And if you look at it, we've been collecting data. So data is it's just like information, but how do you actually tell and tie things together is that storytelling, right? Where you're having ability to frame a technical insight as a business narrative, it's a superpower that like it will change. Like you would actually feel, even the business user feel much more, right? Much more involved because now you're actually talking their language and you're telling it, you're simplifying it and telling the story. part of it is also, my basic mindset is I'm builder by trait, and I love build teams. I actually love build practices, and I like to build and solve solutions for my customers. So having that builder mindset, it becomes much more better in kind of driving, driving in driving, and simplifying complex problems. Like I was talking about, like, hey, you know what? Yes, can you eat an elephant? Yes, but how? Like start one bite at a time, right? Like it's just segmenting that and kind of trying to do it.
Yes, that's great. I love it. That's a great film. So here we go. As we come to our final full stop, Kadar. Okay, I want to offer you an opportunity to give a gift to our audience listening to this right now. What would you say to them as a parting gift as we part company?
So to conclude, right, for the this is my discussion as in the leaders of tomorrow must, I would say, embody three enduring capabilities, right? You guys, if you had listened to it, you always have I have three guiding principles. There's always three things I love to leave with, right? First is what I would say, if you're a technology person, it's all about technology fluency, right? In specifically in this world of how things are coming up, literacy in AI, literacy in automation, and literacy in cloud is going to be an important one for you to be able to look at. Second, what I would actually say is cultural adaptability, right? Leading teams across geography and with empathy and inclusivity is going to be an important part. And then the third one that I would actually leave you with, ethical stewardship, ensuring innovation serves humanity as much as the business, right? If you have that as part of your mindset, it's a completely different way of how you actually solve problems. And in my book, Chaos by Design, right, I also wrote that chaos is not feared, but needs to be harnessed. So when intentionally designed, chaos becomes a crucible for innovation and a catalyst for resilience as well, right? So my call to action on this to everybody is be bold, remain insatiable, curious, and design the future responsibly out of the chaos that surrounds you.
Beautiful. What a beautiful, insightful, wisdom-packed ending to our time together, Kadar. It's been wonderful having you on a session, and I look forward to speaking to you in the future, sir.
Excellent. Thank you, TC. Appreciate it.